All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the May 2018 marketing webinar on how to make sure Google Analytics is not lying to you. This is Zach Stone. I'll be going over some of the deeper Google Analytics information that people sometimes misunderstood or misuse or might not even know that is there. So I want to make sure that you guys have a good understanding of all the different pieces of information within Google Analytics and some of the areas that you can leverage to make the most of your tracking. So before I get into it, I'm going to send everyone a poll on how you'd rate your knowledge of Google Analytics. If you want to just take a second to answer that question so I have a good idea of how strong everyone's Google Analytics knowledge is, that would be really helpful. And I'll get into it while y'all start answering that question. So we're going to talk about primary and secondary dimensions, followed by bounce rate and other data definitions, events, goals, and then some places you can go for help and training. I really wanted to focus this webinar primarily on primary and secondary dimensions because that's the backbone of what Google Analytics is. If you remember stats class, it's all about the way you organize and table your data and how you analyze that information, drill into it even further than you might think you'd be able to. So it looks like most people are in the 2 to 3 range. We got a couple 4s. No one had the kahunas to mark themselves down as a 5. So that's a good starting point. So the difference between dimensions and metrics. So a dimension is going to be any of those data points on the left-hand side that you can drill into. So these are demographics and different areas that people might be coming from, sources, mediums, geographic location, whether they're male or female, what city they came from. There's a lot of different ways to dig into this data, and I'll talk about that here in a second. Anything on the right, the columns, are going to be metrics that you can measure for each one of those different dimensions or secondary dimensions. So that's going to be traffic, sessions, users, bounce rate, pages per session, conversion rate, goals, the time that people are spending on the site. So those primary dimensions, which you can see here in this first graph, the dimension overlay up here, there's a primary dimension section, and then there's a secondary dimension selection right here. So when you drill into these primary dimensions, they start off in what typically you'd be using are things like source and medium. So source is where they came from. Medium would be whether it was paid, organic, or referral traffic, or direct visitor. But the main primary dimensions are listed here. I made any that I find especially helpful in green. All the other ones can be in certain situations, but if you're just starting out, some of these main green ones are going to be good enough for you to get started. Channel, so that's going to be organic, direct, referral, display advertising if you're doing that, email, other, which I'll talk about here in a second, social traffic, paid, webinar, any other custom definitions you have. There's actually a way to customize this. So if you go to admin, which is this little gear icon in the bottom left-hand side, you're able to do a couple different things here in the channel settings. So in channel grouping, you can actually create something new. I wouldn't recommend that because you're going to probably confuse yourself in the long run. And if you're not super sophisticated with Google Analytics, don't mess with this too much because it's going to change your data. But what we've done in certain situations is organize and do things a little bit differently than the default settings. So for the webinar, for example, you all just signed up for that. If the campaign that we send people through contains the word webinar, all that traffic is getting sorted into the webinar channel that we created. So the defaults are going to be organic, paid, direct, social, but you can define your own or reorganize some things depending on how you're using Google Analytics and what's most valuable to you. So just be aware that that's available to you. For campaign, this is going to be anything you're using Google's URL builder for. So that's going to be advertising campaigns, or maybe it's a marketing domain that you're using. Maybe you have a domain or a URL on a billboard that redirects to your site and has that campaign tag on it. That's a different way that you can track the effectiveness of billboards or TV or other print advertising. Landing page is where they landed on when they got to the site. Medium I've talked about, source I've talked about. These other ones are just going to be helpful as you dig into the data at a deeper level. There are hundreds of secondary dimensions. So if you want to think of, and I'll show you an example of this here in a second, but if you want to think of the primary dimensions as that main classifier, that main bucket that you're putting people in, the secondary dimension means that you can slice and dice that to an even finer detail. So there's some helpful information in here, but really what you're looking to do is dissect the traffic and the information coming to your website. So in this example, I used primary dimension as the for the medium. And then I drilled into the primary segment for organic. And then I selected, so that what that does is it allows you to break up your data one more time than a lot of people are able to do. And I'll show you this live here in a second, but I just kind of want to go through it with the example here so you can see what I'm doing. For the secondary dimension, you can drill in farther. So for here, you can see that city is selected. And region is also laid out here. So what I'm talking about is, so you're in Google Analytics, let's say you're in channels, you can really be in any section of the sidebar here. But let's say I wanted to go into organic search. And that's the primary dimension that I'm talking about right here. So if you're in channels, and let's say I switch this to medium, like I used in the example. So this is listing out all the different mediums that people can come through the site, whether it's organic, a direct visit, referral, paid, email, referral when it's spelled wrong. So this is what we're talking about with data integrity, and this is a really good example of that. You need to make sure that you're using consistency when you're drilling in and tracking your different campaigns and data sets. So what a lot of people do or are aware of is they'll hit this secondary dimension and drill into something that they want to find out. But if you click into this primary, I'm now looking at just the organic traffic, and you can actually see up here in the breadcrumbs all traffic, and then I'm drilled into medium organic. So this is just showing me the medium organic, and I can actually drill in one layer deeper, and let's do region here. So now I'm only looking at states that were driving organic traffic to our website. This allows me to get really, and regions is not country specific, so you'll see things like England, and maybe some other ones if you Ontario here, but in the US that's states. So if I wanted to drill in even further and look at, all right, so what cities are driving the most traffic to our website organically, I can drill into the second dimension here, select city, and now I know that 204 or almost 3% of that organic traffic is coming from New York City in New York State, London, England, and LA to follow. Now, let's say I wanted to only look at people who came from New York, the state. I can click this filter. This is known as the filter up here. If you just type in here, you're going to be able to do some basic filtering, but if you click advanced, you can actually change the dimension. So I can either filter by city or region for these dimensions. So let's say I want to do region, and I want to include anything that contains New York. Click that, apply. Now I'm seeing all the different cities in the state of New York who are coming to our website through organic traffic over the period of time. So of the 292 visits from New York, which is about 3% of our total organic traffic, 69% of those visitors are coming from New York City, 1.36% are coming from Syracuse, and so on. So that gives you an idea of how you can drill into different parts of a dimension and get a little bit more specific and get really deep into that data. Like I said, if you were just in channels, and I just clicked on organic search, and then I clicked on region for the secondary, I'm stuck here now. So there isn't a way for me to drill in any further. So by actually looking at the medium or changing this primary dimension to the type of traffic that I'm really interested in, thinking about that biggest bucket, which is organic, and the traffic I want to analyze, I can drill in further by clicking there, changing the primary dimension again to region, and then I can drill in even further by changing that secondary dimension to city. So this is really important, really helpful when you're trying to look at overall traffic, or if you're trying to look at drill into a trend, or maybe you got a big peak of traffic from a certain area, a certain source. This allows you to drill into a level of detail that gives you a lot more insight as to what's actually going on. So this is really helpful. Once you grasp that and become really good at determining how you're going to drill into your dimensions and make sure that you're pulling the right information, it can be very powerful and give you a way to find issues, to find positive trends, negative trends that are helping your marketing and website traffic. So moving from dimensions, we're going to talk about a couple metric things. So bounce rate, this is something that I hear marketing professionals mess up all the time, something I hear people ask a lot. So bounce rate is just the percentage of visitors to a particular website or a web page who navigate from that site after viewing only one page. So the key is that they are not interacting in any way with any other part of the website. They searched for your name, they got to your homepage, maybe they found your phone number and called, and that was it. They didn't click anything, they didn't interact with the site, and that is what we call a bounce. Google actually doesn't care about bounce rate. And this is really important to understand as you get more sophisticated with your marketing. Google cares about pogo sticking. If you Google pogo sticking, we have a great blog post or FAQ on the difference between bounce rate and pogo sticking that is at the top of search results, so check it out. But the key here is bounce is just when someone doesn't visit another page of your site. Pogo sticking is if I go to Google, I search personal injury attorney Atlanta, and I click on your website in search results. I'm there for 30 seconds. I glance at it. I'm like, this isn't really what I'm looking for. I go press the back button in my browser and then click on another website and spend more time and interact with that website at a higher rate. That's known as pogo sticking because I'm going from one result to another, and you don't want to be that result that people jumped away from to go somewhere else, because to Google that indicates, hey, that answer must not have been that great. This other website kept them a lot longer for the same search. Let's move that site up the rankings and move this one that had the user pogo stick down. So bounce rate isn't necessarily an indication of people not getting what they want. They could be searching for your phone number, your address, just what services you provide. Maybe they're just looking at your bio because they searched for your name and Google sent them straight to your bio page. So those pieces of information are, it's not necessary for them to interact or click through on your site more than once. But if they're pogo sticking, they're not finding what they need, that's when you can run into trouble and Google is going to hurt your rankings. So another really helpful piece of information in Google Analytics is the custom segments tool. And we're going to use some of those dimensions we talked about to create a custom segment here as an example. So when you're in Analytics, you'll notice at the top here, segments. It defaults to all users. So this is going to be displaying the traffic, sessions, engagement of all users that came through the site, and you can drill into that information down here. But you can also create a custom segment by clicking on that red box right there after you click add a segment. And this gives you a way to segment any information that you want. So maybe you have a good idea of what your perfect client is and you want to create a couple segments or a single segment that just groups in those people. So you can determine age, gender, maybe language, their location, city, region, and you can use this information here in the demographics to do some of that. Now, especially now with people having the ability in a lot of different countries, well, actually Europe coming out with GDPR, the actual ability for people to say, don't track me, is going to lower the amount of people that you can filter using this segmentation for demographics. So what I'd recommend is using conditions. These are going to look at user interaction as opposed to demographics, which can tend to not be super accurate and will become less so in the future. So let's say I just want to look at, again, organic traffic. So I want to look at medium, contains, organic. So I'm doing the same drill in that I did before. Along with it, so that's about 73% of our users during this time period. Along with this, I want to also just see organic traffic to our blog, let's say. So here, I'm going to, instead of add content, change it to landing page. And there are groupings that you can do, but just go down to the main metric here, dimension, for landing page. And I want it to contain, so all of our blog posts are in the same folder, blog. So I just want to look at all the organic traffic that came through our blog. That's 28% of users. That's a little small. So I'm going to add another condition here, an OR condition. And there's an important difference here. And so organic traffic that has visited or come through blog, or let's say FAQs. If I did and here, I would, instead of or, I would end up with 0 sessions. And the internet's probably being a little rough right now because of me running so many different things, but you want to name your segment and save it. If I put and here, nothing would show up because it would think, oh, there's no one that's come through the blog and an FAQ. So you want to be careful when using and or statements in your conditions. You can see that I did this here. We ended up with about 66% of our traffic. And you can actually look at the conditions on the bottom right-hand side as well as the users and sessions that it drove. So it was anyone that was coming through organic traffic. The landing page contained FAQs or blog. And that way, or at that point, now I'm only looking at traffic for those conditions. So you'll notice when I'm in the channel section, I'm only seeing organic as the channel because that's the only definition that I put in. We're only looking at organic traffic. So this is really helpful for things like, all right, you want to dig into the location of all your organic visitors, for example. So I've already, if I go back up here and apply, because I didn't press save, I'm just looking at the organic traffic for people that came through our blog or FAQs and the states that they're in. This will allow me to drill in and get into what different areas, cities that people are in or are driving traffic to our website. This is more helpful for you than probably for us since we're national. And if you're national, you might want to have just a good idea of where or what states are your top states for organic traffic. If you're regional, obviously that's going to be easier to understand the value of. Another thing that's really helpful in this demographic section or geo section, it defaults to the map, which I like because you can actually hover over each state, see how many users. If you're drilled into a state, and which you can click into, it's going to tell you those different metro areas and cities as well. So that's really helpful and can give you a lot of additional information of where people are actually located. But you don't have to look at the map. You can look at the Explorer view, which will give you the traffic over time that you're typically used to seeing. And that way you can see if there is a big peak from one city, state, region, or area. So I can tell that people from Syracuse came in on these 4 different dates to our blog and FAQ section in organic traffic because I've segmented that out. To remove it and go back to all users, you can just drag it away and press apply and it'll default back to all users. So this is really great. If you're constantly finding yourself filtering or looking at specific information, this is a great way to shortcut that for yourself moving forward. Some other helpful data definitions that I hear people mess up all the time, but the key one here is probably session duration versus time on page. Session duration is the average length of time of someone's session on your website. So they entered through page A and they stayed there for 1 minute and then they went to page B. That visitor is going to be seen as an average session duration of 1 minute. For the person that goes to a separate visitor, goes to page A, and then they never go to page B, but they're on your site on that first page for 2 minutes, the average session duration is still going to be 0 because they didn't interact with another page. Average time on page will give you the metric of how long people are actually staying on one page or another, and those two differences, that's a big difference that people often misunderstand or look at in the wrong way. It's important to understand that distinction there. The next section I wanted to kind of look at was site speed reporting, Google Analytics. This area is not as old as some of the other sections, but you can actually look at page time speed of individual pages. It'll give you an average load time. Now, remember, this is the complete load of all scripts and everything. This isn't the time it takes for a user to see everything on your page, but it'll give you an idea of what pages might be not performing as well. In this speed suggestions section, it'll give you essentially a link to the page speed insights for each of those pages. But I want you guys to understand something about this report, because a lot of people get all up in arms over data or information that they don't truly understand. So you can see that this, the easiest way to add pop-ups to your YouTube videos, this is one of the full load fastest pages in the top 10 on our website, but it's got the lowest page speed score. So page speed score and load time are not directly correlated. All that the page speed insights tool tells you is essentially that this this page has a ton of images on it because it's instructional blog post and it needs a bunch of images to talk you through it. So it's got a really low score, even though it has a pretty good load time, but it's dinging us on certain aspects and it's just a aggregate score. You don't want to put too much weight into this. You want to make sure that you clean up and make sure your pages are as fast as possible. And you can do that a lot by just compressing images. But sometimes that information will lead you astray. So be careful with that. When you're in the overview section, this is where you'll see these metrics here. So average page load time, and this is a full page load. This is actually the metrics after one of our most recent redesigns where we've cleaned up quite a lot of code on the back end and implemented some things on our from the server side that helps the site deliver a lot faster. If you haven't had a redesign, if you're a Foster client, you haven't had a redesign in the last 2 years, I highly recommend reaching out. Go to fwmdesign.com and someone can talk to you. If you fill out that form, someone can talk to you about your options for upgrading the site, potentially speeding up everything across the board, as well as improve the layout and design of the desktop and mobile site. So there's a lot of good information there. This is the page level stuff, but it's also looking at how long it takes the server and other things to serve the website content that people aren't even aware of. It's really important to know what's going on here, but don't get too caught up on individual page level stuff. All right, so events are something we've talked about before, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but just remember there are 3 levels to events. Category, which buckets similar things together. So for an example, calls would be an event category. Actions, so this would be the type of call or the whether it's a website, AdWords, referral call. And we actually are able to pump this information into Google Analytics through call tracking metrics. If you don't see in your event section, if you don't see calls and you're using call tracking metrics with us, just let us know and we'll set that up for you. But you should be able to see this calls event. And then labels. So this would be, for calls, would be the individual number being used. So you can see down here, we've got all events, event category calls, and then we drilled into the website calls, and then at the label level, we're looking at the individual phone numbers. I know some of this stuff seems way complicated. Trust me, once it's set up, you don't have to think about it as much. So if you have questions, let us know and we can make sure things are set up properly. This is an example of some of the categories and actions that you might have in your event section. So if you have Engage, they have a great event categorization on the back end for Google Analytics. If it's not set up already, that's an easy thing to turn on. If you're with another chat provider, they probably have something similar, but I don't know specifically what those definitions might be. More information on events, I'll let you guys read this when we send out the presentation. You want to have events, a good understanding of events on your website, which are just essentially different actions that people can take on the website, whether they click a link, engage in a chat, pick up the phone and call, so that you can actually track goals. Goals are transactional events. When people fill out a contact form, you want to know that because that's a good indication that they became a lead. When they download a book, when they pick up the phone and call you, when they chat you. So you can see here, this is an example of what the chat event would look like in a goal setup for Engage chats. Its category would be chat. The action would be conversion as opposed to answer. So they're actually leaving an email, and you can separate those chats out in Google Analytics and know that this goal is only reporting on those people that actually gave their email as opposed to just interacted with the chat box. But these goals in Google Analytics are really important and can give you a good way to know how different areas of your site are performing. So in Analytics, if you go to the Skier Admin button and you go to Goals, you'll be able to see all the different goals that are set up. You only have 20, so keep that in mind. We are at our capacity. So if you have done this a lot in the past and maybe you didn't set them up properly or there's an issue, then you might want to update some of those goals with new definitions. Keep in mind, though, what I've found is that if you take a goal that's for an event and or for a destination and you try to switch it to an event goal, it doesn't report properly, which is why some of these aren't reporting. That's something that you probably won't run into, but just keep in mind. I've got steps on how to set up goals in Analytics. You click that admin button, select goals, click new goal. I recommend on that setup that you do a custom goal. These are all baked in through Google Analytics and have definitions that sometimes don't work properly. But if you just name your goal, that custom goal setup, if you name it whatever you're trying to track, and then you're going to use the destination or event. So if you're going to use an event for things like chat and calls, you're going to use destination for contact forms, report downloads, and those kind of things. These goals are really just meant to be important actions. I don't recommend doing duration or pages screens per session because that will artificially inflate your goals numbers, and you might think that your website converts at 80% when in reality it converts at 5%. It's just you've got a duration goal of 5 minutes and people are spending a lot of time on the site, but they're not converting. So that's something you want to be careful of. In that destination URL goal that I mentioned, the next step is to put in the thank you URL, so that you want the goal destination to be the URL of where someone ends up after completing a form or download. So for Foster sites, for contact forms, you're going to use the destination begins with /thank-u.cfm. To verify that, there's a verify button that you set it up properly. If you've gotten a contact form in the last 7 days, it'll tell you that that goal is converting at X percentage. The value in the funnel aren't necessary, but I'd use the funnel on things like report downloads, so because they're all going to have the same thank you URL typically, unless you overwrite it in DSS or another whatever platform you're using to manage your website. That's going to allow you to say, all right, they have to go through this offer page before they get to the thank you page for this goal to trigger. Goals, if you're not familiar already, are going to show up in the metrics column of a lot of different sections of analytics, but they show up over on the right-hand side under conversions, and you can switch from all goals to contact, call, whatever you've got set up here. But that's how you're kind of breaking out what's driving the contacts on your website. One thing that you can do with this is use the reverse goal path report, which under conversions, goals, reverse goal path. This is going to give you an idea of this is where the goal completion happened. So they landed on the thank you page for downloading a report, and this was from requesting an analysis during that time period. And you can see that most people or 24 people were actually entering the site through the analysis page and ending up on the reports thank you. So that gives us an idea of how people are coming through and requesting that offer. There is a ton of help and training materials on Google Analytics down here in the Discover tab. This gives you a ton of add-ons and training materials, strategy and tools if you're really trying to get after it and make the most of Google Analytics. There's a lot more to go over here. I know that was a pretty top level view of some of the more sophisticated areas and data sets in analytics. If it confused you, don't worry. One day you'll look back to this webinar and realize that you understand all of it. But for those of you that were able to follow along, hopefully you'll be able to leverage some of those tricks and dimensions and setups to make the most of your Google Analytics. And if you need help, feel free to go to fwmanalysis.com. If you're a client, we'll make sure that everything's set up properly. If you're not, we'll talk through how working with us would make your analytics setup work properly, or if you've got issues with that. If you don't have access to Google Analytics, ask your web provider to give it to you. There's no reason that you shouldn't have access to your own data for your website. And that is all. Thank you so much for joining the webinar in May 2018. I appreciate everyone joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks.